sound of a gentle splash. Sunlight glinting off a pristine pool, her voice so casual. The kids can use it any time. Visuals flash, unsupervised children screaming. A broken fence, a crushed pool floaty. Any time became an invasion. My kindness became a weakness. The camera pans down to a gloved hand twisting a valve. The deep, guttural sound of rushing water fills the air. And so I made sure there was no pool left to use. Alara had bought the house for the pool. It wasn't a whim or a luxury. It was a promise she had made to herself. After 2 decades of a marriage that had slowly suffocated the joy from her, and a divorce that had left her with a hollowed-out sense of self, the pool was her sanctuary. The cool cerulean water was a blank canvas where she could finally float, weightless, and reclaim her peace. She had spent the last 2 months meticulously caring for it, balancing the chemicals, skimming the surface, and watching the water ripple under the sun. It was perfect. She was, for the first time in years, beginning to feel perfect again, too. The perfection ended the day Brenda moved in next door. Brenda was a whirlwind of frantic energy. Her suburban mom's chic uniform of yoga pants and designer t-shirts always slightly askew, as if she'd just survived an explosion of domestic chaos. She was a single mother of 3, a fact she declared with a mix of weary pride and theatrical exhaustion on their first meeting. Her kids, 12-year-old twins, a boy named Leo and a girl named Mia, and a surprisingly quiet 9-year-old Charlie, were a blur of motion, perpetually bouncing and chattering and leaving a trail of brightly colored sports equipment in their wake. "Oh my gosh, I can't believe you have a pool," Brenda had exclaimed, her voice cutting through the humid afternoon air like a siren. She had marched right up to Alara's fence line, hands on her hips, her smile as wide and demanding as the Texas sky. "My kids would absolutely die for that. I mean, it's practically in our backyard anyway, isn't it?" Alara, conditioned by years of feigning amicability, had smiled back. "It's lovely, yes. It was the main reason I bought the place." She'd kept her tone friendly but firm, a silent barrier around her little slice of paradise. But Brenda didn't seem to understand the concept of a silent barrier. She was a bulldozer of casual demands. For the next week, she'd pop her head over the fence every time Alara was outside. "How's the water? Looks so refreshing." Or, "You're lucky to have that. My kids are going crazy from the heat." The guilt tripping was subtle at first, a light drizzle of passive aggression that felt too small to confront. Alara finally caved on a Tuesday after a particularly grueling day at work. She was in her bikini, feet dangling in the water, when Brenda's voice boomed over the fence. "Alara, my kids are having a meltdown over here. Is there any chance they could come over for just a little bit?" Something inside Alara, a flicker of her old, well-meaning self, told her to be a good neighbor. To build a bridge, to be the kind of person who shared. She stood up, her bare feet meeting the warm concrete. "You know what, Brenda? They can absolutely use it. Just give me a heads up so I know when they're coming. I'm happy to share." Brenda's face lit up, a triumph she didn't bother to hide. "Oh, Alara, you're an angel." "Thank you so much. I promise we'll be respectful. The first few times were fine." Brenda would text, "Kids coming over for a dip, 2 p.m. for an hour. Thanks again." Alara would move to her patio or go inside and watch from a distance as the 3 kids splashed politely. They were loud but not offensively so. It felt like a fair trade, a brief disruption for the peace of mind that came with being a good person. Then, the texts stopped. The first time it happened, Alara was in her living room, laptop open, when she heard the distinct, high-pitched shriek of a child's cannonball. She peered out the window and saw all 3 kids already in the water, their towels and shoes scattered across her perfectly manicured lawn. The fence gate was propped open with a large stone. Brenda's voice drifted over the fence. "Just jumping in, Alara." "Thank you." A knot of unease tightened in Alara's stomach. It wasn't a big deal, she told herself. It was just one time. But it felt like a boundary had been crossed without her permission, a silent contract broken. A week later, it happened again. This time, Alara was outside gardening. The kids, with 2 new friends she'd never seen before, marched through the open gate as if they owned the place. They didn't even glance at her. One of the friends, a lanky teenager with bright blue swim trunks, threw a beach ball at the house, missing the window by inches. When she cleared her throat, they all turned, their eyes wide. "Oh," one of them said. "We thought you weren't home." "I live here," Ilara said, her voice strained. "Oh, right." "My mom said we could use the pool," the boy said, a smirk playing on his lips. "She said your kids could use her pool any time, so you're even." The words struck Ilara with the force of a physical blow. Her kids? She didn't have kids. Brenda had invented a reciprocal agreement that didn't exist, a convenient lie to justify her kids' unchecked access. The tension escalated over the next few weeks into a steady, draining assault. Her pool floats were left punctured, discarded on the lawn. A small, inflatable filter pump she had bought to improve circulation was discovered cracked, its gears grinding, its motor smoking. Brenda, when confronted, was a masterpiece of performative confusion. "Oh, that? Must have been there already, Ilara. The kids would never do that." There was no apology, no offer to help, just a dismissive wave of the hand. "Kids will be kids," she'd repeat, as if the phrase were a magic shield that absolved her of all responsibility. The final straw came on a sweltering Saturday afternoon. Ilara had just arrived home from a particularly miserable week, dreaming of her first peaceful float. She pulled into the driveway and froze. The loud, pounding thud of a subwoofer rattled the windows of her car. Over the fence, a full-blown pool party was in progress. A dozen teenagers she'd never seen before, all laughing and shouting, were packed into her small pool like sardines. Her perfectly manicured lawn was littered with red plastic cups, empty chip bags, and towels. Someone had propped open the gate, and a trail of muddy footprints led from the pool deck, across her patio, and right up to her sliding glass door. The sacred space was no longer hers. It was a public park, a free-for-all she had foolishly, unknowingly sanctioned. Ilara's vision blurred with white-hot rage. She didn't bother to go inside. She marched to the fence, her hands clenched into fists. "Brenda! Brenda!" she shouted over the noise. Brenda's head popped over the fence, her smile bright and unbothered. "Oh, hey, Ilara! What a great day for a party, right?" "This is not a party, Brenda. This is an invasion. You told me to my face you would be respectful." Ilara's voice was shaking. "My pool is not a public swimming hole. You can't just let your kids and all their friends come over without asking." Brenda's smile didn't falter. She leaned on the fence, a patronizing look in her eyes. "Ilara, what is the big deal?" "It's just water. You told me they could use it any time. So they are." "What? Are you going to stop them? Are you really going to tell a bunch of teenagers they can't cool off on the hottest day of the year?" "That's pretty cold, Ilara." The words, "It's just water and pretty cold," echoed in Ilara's ears, mingling with the grinding sound of her broken filter. The sheer audacity of the woman, the casual cruelty of her entitlement, hit Ilara like a physical blow. Brenda wasn't just a bad neighbor. She was a parasite. She had seen Ilara's kindness as a weakness, her sanctuary as a commodity, and she was going to drain her of both until there was nothing left. Ilara looked from Brenda's smiling, triumphant face to the chaos in her backyard, the muddy footprints leading to her door. She thought about the peace she had bought, the tranquility she had promised herself. And in that moment, she knew she had to end this. Not with a polite conversation, not with a frustrated sigh. With something final, something irreversible. Without another word, she turned away from the fence. Brenda called out, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Where are you going, Ilara?" "You said any time, remember?" Ilara ignored her. She walked around the side of her house to the back of the pool, where the main pump and filtration system were housed. She knelt, her hands finding the thick black valve where the main drain line ran. She didn't hesitate. She didn't have to think about it. With a grunt, she twisted the heavy valve, feeling the cold, satisfying click of metal on metal as she cranked it open. A low, powerful sucking sound erupted, and a small whirlpool began to form over the main drain at the deep end of the pool. Brenda, still watching from the fence, had stopped talking. She was staring, a flicker of genuine shock on her face. Ilara, however, didn't look at her. The low, powerful sucking sound of the main drain became the soundtrack to Ilara's revenge. It was a guttural, hungry roar that seemed to swallow the boisterous sounds of the teenagers' party in a single gulp. The laughing and shouting died down to a confused silence, replaced by a new, more frantic noise, a panicked, splashing scramble. Brenda, her mouth agape, was the first to react. "What did you do?" she shrieked, her voice cracking with disbelief. She scrambled up the side of her fence, her face a mask of furious shock. "Ilara, what in God's name did you do?" Ilara didn't turn around. She was mesmerized, watching the water level drop in her pool. It was a slow, deliberate act of reclamation. The surface, once a placid blue mirror, now had a swirling vortex in its center, pulling everything down with it. The teenagers, who just moments before had been performing cannonballs and splashing one another, were now wading in confusion in what was rapidly becoming a shallow, chlorinated puddle. "Ilara!" Brenda was screaming now, her voice thick with pure, unadulterated fury. "That's my children in there! Are you completely insane?" Finally, Ilara turned. Her face was calm, a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding in her backyard. She met Brenda's wide, disbelieving eyes. "You said my kids could use your pool any time," she said, her voice low and steady, a razor's edge beneath a placid surface. "I made sure there was no pool to use." The words hung in the humid air, silencing Brenda for a full, tense second. Then all hell broke loose. The kids, now ankle-deep in the remaining water, began to climb out, slipping on the slick, algae-covered sides of the pool. Their shouts of laughter had turned into cries of anger and frustration. "My phone!" one girl yelled, holding up a dripping device. "This is so not cool!" another one whined. Brenda scrambled over the fence with an agility that Ilara hadn't known she possessed. She landed with a clumsy thud on the concrete deck and stormed toward Ilara, her hands on her hips, her eyes blazing. "You maniac! You could have hurt them! I'm calling the police!" "You're calling the police for trespassers who were destroying my property?" Ilara asked, a faint sardonic smile playing on her lips. "Be my guest, Brenda. I'll make sure to have the camera footage of them throwing a ball at my house and the proof of them breaking my pump ready for the officers." Brenda's face paled for a moment, her bluster deflating slightly. But the entitled fury quickly returned. "You don't get it, do you? You can't just drain a pool like that. That's a huge waste of water. That's a city violation. That's destruction of property." "It's my property, Brenda," Ilara said, her voice rising slightly. "My sanctuary. You broke that. You let your kids and all their friends break my things, stomp mud through my yard, and turn my peaceful home into a public wading pool. You did this." Brenda stared at her, a silent, vicious anger radiating from her. Her children were looking at them, their faces a mix of embarrassment and confusion. Ilara's quiet victory was a spectacle, an act of defiance that she had never thought herself capable of. "You're going to pay for this, Ilara," Brenda said, her voice a low hiss. "I am going to make sure you pay for every single gallon of water, every single broken piece of equipment. You have no idea who you're messing with." "I think I do," Ilara replied, her gaze unwavering. Brenda stomped back across the lawn, grabbing her kids by the arm and herding them through the now open gate. "Everyone out! We're leaving!" she bellowed. "We are going to find a lawyer who will make her wish she'd never moved here." With a final withering glare, Brenda disappeared through the gate, her kids following close behind, leaving behind a trail of abandoned towels, plastic cups, and the haunting, gurgling sound of the last drops of water disappearing down the drain. Ilara stood alone in the quiet, watching the whirlpool finally dissipate as the last of the water vanished. The bottom of the pool was now visible, a mottled blue and gray concrete bowl, empty. It felt hollow. A fleeting sense of triumph was immediately replaced by a profound emptiness, a cold satisfaction that didn't fill the hole Brenda and her kids had left. She had her space back, yes, but it was a ruined, desolate space. The sanctuary was gone, replaced by a pit of concrete. She spent the rest of the day in a numb stupor, cleaning up the garbage left behind. She picked up the crumpled chip bags and the red plastic cups, tossing them into a trash bag with a vicious satisfaction. She found a brand-new pool toy, a giant inflatable flamingo poking out from a rose bush, a gaping hole in its side. The sight of it filled her with a fresh wave of quiet fury. That evening, as the sun set and bathed the empty pool in a bruised-looking purple and orange light, she sat on her patio, staring into the gaping hole. The silence was deafening. The tranquility she had so desperately sought was here, but it was the silence of a tomb. The next morning, the real consequences began to unfold. A knock on her door startled her from her coffee. It wasn't the police, as she had half expected. Instead, it was a perfectly coiffed, middle-aged woman from the Homeowners Association, a clipboard clutched in her hand. "Alara?" the woman asked, her voice tight and disapproving. "Brenda from next door called in a report about a significant water drainage issue." "Do you have a permit for this?" Alara, her heart pounding, explained the situation calmly, omitting the vengeful rage that had fueled her decision. She presented the broken filter pump, the punctured floats. The woman from the HOA nodded, her expression unreadable. She took notes, snapping a few pictures of the empty pool, and then left, promising to be in touch. Alara braced herself for the fine, the community reprimand, the beginning of a long, drawn-out neighborhood war. 2 hours later, another knock. This time it was an older man in a city-issued uniform, the city water inspector. Brenda hadn't just gone to the HOA. She had gone to the city. Alara went through the same story again, her voice a little more frayed this time. He took a few pictures, a few measurements, and issued a formal warning. "A fine for water waste is likely coming your way, ma'am. You should have hired a professional to do this properly." Alara felt the weight of her impulsive action crushing her. She had been so consumed by a need for justice that she hadn't considered the consequences. She was now the neighborhood pariah, the spiteful, vengeful woman who had ruined a simple neighborhood party and broken every rule in the book to do it. She spent the rest of the day dreading the inevitable confrontation. She knew she had made a terrible mistake. She should have just talked to Brenda again or gone to the HOA first. She had acted out of emotion, and now she was going to pay for it. Then, just as she was about to call her lawyer, her phone pinged with an email notification. It was from the HOA. She opened it with a trembling hand, expecting a notice of a hefty fine. Instead, the subject line read, "Regarding complaint against Brenda Miller, property at 1234 Willow Lane." Alara's breath hitched. She scrolled down, her eyes scanning the official letterhead. It detailed a series of complaints received from Alara, including photographs of the damaged property and the broken filter pump. It outlined Brenda's verbal admission of granting her kids anytime access and the subsequent unauthorized use. It stated that Brenda had been issued a formal notice to cease and desist any further use of Alara's property. The final paragraph was a verdict, delivered with the cold, bureaucratic finality of an official document. Furthermore, due to the documented destruction of property and the resulting professional services required for repair, a separate claim has been opened with Brenda Miller for reimbursement of damages. The costs for replacing the damaged filter pump, along with the professional draining and cleaning of the pool due to unauthorized use, will be pursued by the Homeowners Association on your behalf. Additionally, a civil fine of $1,000 will be levied against Ms. Miller for repeated violations of community regulations regarding unapproved gatherings and property boundary disputes. Alara read the email twice. Then a third time, a slow smile spreading across her face. It wasn't justice from her own hands. It was something far better. It was bureaucratic, legal, and so perfectly, deliciously ironic. Brenda's attempt to use the system against her had just become a weapon in Alara's hands, a quiet, devastating counterstrike that had hit its target with pinpoint precision. Brenda didn't just read the email. She reread it 3 times, her eyes scanning the official-looking header, the formal language, the cold, hard numbers that added up to $1,000 fine and a long, expensive list of damages. Her cheeks, usually a shade of healthy, sun-kissed pink, were now a blotchy, furious red. Her fingers, trembling with a mix of disbelief and pure, unadulterated rage, fumbled with her phone until she found Alara's number. She didn't bother with a text. She called. Alara's phone rang, the unexpected jolt a disruption to the fragile peace she was starting to rebuild. The caller ID read Brenda Neighbor. Ilara stared at it for a moment, a knot forming in her stomach. She hadn't expected the HOA email to land a punch this fast. She took a deep breath and answered, "You absolute sociopath!" Brenda's voice was a high-pitched shriek, a sound that made Ilara instinctively pull the phone away from her ear. "You think this is over? You think you can just sick the Homeowners Association on me and get away with it? You have no idea who you're messing with." "The HOA sided with me, Brenda," Ilara said, her voice calm and level, a deliberate counterpoint to Brenda's hysteria. "Your kids were trespassing. They damaged my property. You were negligent. It's all in the report. My kids are not trespassers. We had an agreement. You said they could use your pool anytime." Brenda's voice was venomous. "And what about the agreement that my kids could use your pool if I let your kids use mine? You're a liar and a child-hating monster. This is defamation. I'm going to sue you for everything you have." "I don't have kids, Brenda," Ilara stated, the simple truth an unmovable wall against Brenda's fabricated reality. The line went silent for a moment. Ilara could hear the ragged sound of Brenda's breathing, the gears of her mind grinding to a furious halt. You don't have kids," Brenda finally said, the question a whisper of pure shock. "But my son said—" "You said—" "I said nothing of the sort," Ilara replied. "And you know it." Brenda slammed the phone down, the abrupt end of the call more jarring than the tirade. Ilara stood there, phone in hand, the silence a heavy weight. She had won this round, but the victory felt hollow. This wasn't over. Brenda was not the type of person who admitted defeat. She was a dog with a bone, and she had just been robbed. Over the next few days, the quiet, respectful community Ilara had moved into dissolved into a tense, hostile landscape. When she would take out her trash, neighbors she had once exchanged pleasantries with would turn their backs or give her a cold, scrutinizing look. The mailman, a friendly older man who always smiled, suddenly averted his eyes and hurried past. Ilara started to feel like she was living in a fishbowl, a public spectacle for the entire neighborhood to observe and judge. The gossip didn't stay in whispers for long. One evening, Ilara was scrolling through her community's Facebook group, a usually benign space for lost dog posts and local event announcements. She saw a post from Brenda. It was an artfully crafted masterpiece of half-truths and victimhood. "Warning, dangerous neighbor." The post began, the bold text, a digital scream. It went on to describe in dramatic and hyperbolic detail how Ilara had maliciously and without warning drained her pool, endangering the lives of several children. It claimed Ilara had lured the kids in with a false promise of a shared space, only to violently retaliate when they were having fun. Brenda attached photos, not of Ilara's pool, but of her own kids' tear-stained faces and the empty, sun-parched lawn. The comment section was a torrent of outrage. "That's absolutely sick. Who does that to children? What an evil woman. Glad you're posting this, Brenda. We need to watch out for our kids. I always got a weird vibe from her. She never seemed to have anyone over. She sounds like a bitter, lonely divorcee with nothing better to do." Ilara's heart pounded, a sick, churning feeling in her stomach. The words were like tiny knives, each one slicing a piece of her soul. The last comment, a cruel, accurate blow, hit her the hardest. A lonely divorcee. It was the one thing she was trying so desperately not to be. The one thing she thought she had escaped by buying this house. She typed a response, her fingers shaking. She laid out the facts, presented a calm, rational defense, and even mentioned the HOA's verdict. It was no use. Brenda and her friends immediately swarmed the comments, burying her truth under an avalanche of ridicule and dismissive emojis. The post went viral within the small insular community, a testament to the power of a good villain. The physical harassment began shortly after. It was subtle at first. A bike tire mark on her pristine driveway. A trash can knocked over and left in the middle of her lawn, its contents spilling out. Then it escalated. One morning, she found a small dead bird left on her front porch. Another day, someone had spray-painted a single black word on the concrete of her empty pool. Witch. The word, crudely written but viscerally hateful, felt like a judgment, an execution. Ilara knew it was Brenda. The audacity was too specific, but she had no proof. The security cameras she had installed hadn't caught a thing. The perpetrator was always just out of view, a phantom menace. She called the police, but they dismissed it as a simple neighborhood dispute. "Go to the HOA, ma'am. We can't get involved unless there's clear evidence of a crime." The irony was a bitter taste in her mouth. She had tried to go the proper route, and now she was paying for it. The empty pool, once her symbol of freedom and healing, was now a constant, gaping reminder of her failure. It was no longer a symbol of peace. It was an open wound. She hired a crew to clean it professionally, to repair the damage. The workers, a team of young men in blue uniforms, worked in the sweltering heat. As they worked, Alara watched them from her kitchen window, a strange sense of shame overwhelming her. She felt like she was exposing her private shame, the ugly scar of her past. One of the workers, a burly man with a kind face, looked up at her window. He smiled, a genuine warm smile that made her flinch. It was the first act of kindness she had received from a stranger in a week. He walked to the edge of the empty pool and picked up a piece of jagged white plastic. He looked at it for a moment, then looked up at her again, his smile gone, replaced by an expression of grim understanding. He held up the object for her to see. It was a fragment of the cracked filter pump, but attached to it was a small, round object. Alara squinted. It was a tracking device, the kind you could buy online and stick to anything. Alara felt a cold dread wash over her. Brenda wasn't just a spiteful neighbor. She was a calculating, vindictive enemy. She hadn't just been letting her kids into the yard. She had been tracking their movements, and by extension, Alara's. She had known exactly when Alara was home, when she was gone, when the coast was clear for her kids to invade her space. The lie about the shared pool was just the smokescreen. The real game was about control, about power, about Brenda asserting her dominance over Alara's life. Alara's phone pinged with a new notification. It was a new post in the community group. She opened it, her heart thudding. It was a photo of her, taken through her kitchen window. The caption was short, simple, and utterly terrifying. "The Witch of Willow Lane is having her dirty secrets scrubbed away." Alara looked up from her phone, her eyes scanning her backyard, the empty pool, the cleanup crew, and then she saw it. Over Brenda's fence, a small, glinting object. It was a camera, a motion-activated zoom lens camera, pointed directly at her property, and she suddenly understood the true extent of her vulnerability. Brenda's war wasn't about the pool. It was about controlling Alara's every move. She had made a promise to herself to take back her peace, but Brenda had just made a vow to take away her privacy. It was a small, unassuming black box, no bigger than a cigarette lighter, tucked discreetly among the sprawling leaves of a Japanese maple tree in Brenda's yard. It wasn't a doorbell camera or a security cam on the house. It was a strategic, clandestine device, a silent eye pointed directly at Alara's empty pool and, by extension, her life. The realization sent a cold wave of dread through her. Brenda wasn't just a belligerent neighbor. She was a stalker. Alara's sanctuary, the space she had fought to reclaim, was now a stage. The pool, once her private, healing refuge, was a constant, gaping reminder of her vulnerability. Every time she stepped outside, she felt it, a prickling sensation on her skin, the imagined click of a lens, the unseen audience of the community Facebook group watching her every move. She saw herself as Brenda must be seeing her, a solitary, defeated figure haunting her empty pool, the silent, angry witch of Willow Lane. The paranoia was a physical weight. The simple act of checking the mail became a public performance. She'd hurry back inside, her heart pounding, feeling the phantom judgment of the camera. The security cameras she had installed hadn't caught the spray painter, but they were useless now. The true threat wasn't in her yard. It was in Brenda's. The game had changed from a property dispute to a full-blown psychological war, and Brenda had just deployed a weapon Alara hadn't even known existed. She spent the next few days in a state of hypervigilance, locked in her home. She was a prisoner in her own space. She called the police again, her voice tight with a mix of fear and frustration. "There's a camera on her tree," she explained, pointed at my yard. I have a right to privacy." The officer on the phone was sympathetic, but ultimately unhelpful. "Ma'am, as long as the camera is on her property and not violating any specific peeping laws, she's well within her rights to film her own yard. We can't tell her where to point her camera. It's a civil matter." Ilara hung up, a bitter taste in her mouth. She had to fight this alone. Brenda had used the law to her advantage, and now the same system was stonewalling Ilara. She walked to the window and stared at the empty pool, the clean, smooth concrete bottom reflecting the afternoon sun. It was an ugly, useless hole, an open wound, but it was hers, and she was not going to let Brenda win. A new kind of anger began to bubble up inside her, a cold, hard, strategic fury that was nothing like the hot, impulsive rage that had driven her to drain the pool. This was different. This was about turning the other person's advantage into their greatest weakness. Brenda wanted a show? Ilara would give her one. She would become the witch Brenda had painted her to be, but on her own terms. The first step was to play to her audience. She went online and ordered a cheap theatrical costume, a long, flowing black dress with wide sleeves. She bought a cauldron-sized planter pot from the local nursery and an old, twisted piece of driftwood she found at a thrift store. She spent an entire day moving her garden gnomes and a pair of decorative gargoyles to the edge of the empty pool, arranging them in a semicircle like a grotesque audience. Brenda's phone and the community group began to light up. The captions Ilara knew would be breathless and panicked. "She's setting up some kind of shrine in her yard." "The witch is preparing a ritual." Ilara didn't respond. She just watched from her kitchen window, a faint smile on her face. She was in control of the narrative now. Brenda was reacting to her. Her plan was simple, audacious, and a direct assault on Brenda's sense of control. Brenda was a voyeur, a spectator to Ilara's life. Ilara would turn the tables and force Brenda to be the star of her own private show. It was a quiet Tuesday evening just after dusk. The air was heavy with the smell of cut grass and humidity. Ilara waited until she saw Brenda's kitchen light turn on, a signal that she was home and likely checking the community group for updates. She went outside, dressed in her long black dress, carrying a small, innocuous-looking package. She walked slowly, deliberately, her movements theatrical and exaggerated. She set the package down on the edge of the pool, right where the camera's lens would have a perfect, unobstructed view. Then she walked to her patio door, went inside and sat down at her kitchen table. She picked up her phone and opened the community Facebook group. Her heart pounded in her chest. The seconds stretched into an agonizing minute. A notification appeared. A new post from Brenda. The photo was a blurry, grainy shot of Ilara, a dark silhouette on the edge of the empty pool, the small package a suspicious black shape beside her. The caption was short and frantic. "She just put a package by the pool. Anyone know what this is? I'm seriously freaked out." Ilara closed the app, her breath a silent exhalation of relief. Brenda had taken the bait. Now came the hard part. The next morning, the package was gone. Ilara, feigning innocence, walked out to her yard and discovered it was missing. She knew Brenda had taken it. The question was, what was Brenda looking for? What did she think Ilara had put there? Ilara had a feeling it was a small victory for Brenda, a treasure hunt she had won. But the victory was a setup. The package had been a decoy. Inside, there was nothing but a half-empty bottle of pool cleaner. Ilara spent the rest of the day in a state of suspended animation, waiting. She had placed the package in the most likely spot for Brenda to find and film, an obvious focal point for her camera. But what Brenda didn't know was that Ilara had been watching her just as closely. She had spent hours studying the camera. It was not just a motion-activated lens. It was a Wi-Fi-enabled device connected to Brenda's home network. And in the moments before Brenda had posted the photo of Ilara in her backyard, Ilara had noticed something on Brenda's property, the delivery truck. A large, nondescript van had pulled up to Brenda's curb, and a man had carried a large black box to her front door. The box was sealed, addressed to Brenda, and its contents were a mystery. But it was the timing that was the key. Ilara's decoy had been a distraction. While Brenda was focused on Ilara's package, something much more important had been delivered to her own home. Ilara's phone buzzed with an email. It was from the delivery service she had looked up online, a small, independent company she had tracked down by tracing the name on the truck. She hadn't ordered anything, but she knew Brenda had. She opened the email. It was a receipt for Brenda's purchase, forwarded to a public email address that Ilara had been monitoring. The item was listed as Specialty Equipment Water Test Kit. It wasn't a standard pool test kit. This was different. Ilara knew what it was. Her husband had a similar one. It was a professional grade kit, the kind a pool inspector would use, designed to test for the presence of specific, highly regulated chemicals that could indicate a health hazard. Ilara felt a slow, triumphant smile spread across her face. Brenda wasn't just trying to get Ilara in trouble with the HOA anymore. She was trying to prove that the pool, Ilara's empty sanctuary, was a biological hazard. She was building a new case, a new lie, and this time it was a full-blown assault that could land Ilara in a very different kind of trouble. The war had just escalated from a petty dispute to a dangerous game of legal and chemical warfare, and Ilara had just found the evidence she needed to win.